Here are 6 really common driving habits that I see people doing all the time, but they can actually prove to have serious consequences and perhaps even cost you your life or cause immeasurable damage to your car or maybe even someone else. So you might think a lot of these things apply to new drivers, but actually experienced drivers often get into bad habits. So this video is just going to flag up a few areas where people often fall short of the ideal and run unnecessary risks when it comes to driving their car. So the first problem I see all of the time on the roads, and I'm sure you do, let me know in the comments what your experience has been, is following the car in front too closely. So one of the critical things to think about is your stopping distance. So you need obviously to allow a little bit of time to react. You may feel that when you see something, your foot goes on the brake immediately. There's quite an outstanding delay in the distance that you travel before you actually start to make any progress towards stopping the car. So you've got your thinking distance, then you've got your stopping distance. So that is the physical distance it takes for the car to stop. Now on wet roads and icy conditions, that is substantially longer than it would be on dry conditions. So most drivers actually fall short in those areas where the road conditions are less than ideal and the stopping distance has been greatly increased and they've not given themselves extra distance between the car in front. So how do you measure the distance between you and the car in front and ensure that you're driving at a correct distance from them? Well, here in the UK we had a campaign on TV many years ago, and it's basically the phrase "only a fool breaks the 2-second rule." So as you're travelling along, you'll look for a marker on the road, perhaps an overpass bridge, a road sign, a mark on the road surface. So when the car in front of you goes over that, say to yourself, "Only a fool breaks the 2-second rule." And if you've crossed that marker before you finish saying that, you're driving too close. Now it's crude, but it's quite effective. It's surprisingly effective actually, and that will maintain a safe stopping distance between you and the car in front. If you've got someone driving too close behind you, you may even need to allow yourself more of a stopping distance just to compensate for the idiot behind you, so you can take a little bit more time stopping your car and allow the driver behind you a little bit more time to react and hopefully avoid that rear end shunt or rear end collision. So the second point we're going to talk about is checks on the car. So most people, most mornings, you're in a rush, you're late, you will just get in the car and drive off. How many people actually stop and give the tyres a physical check just to make sure they're not deflated? How many people actually check the tyre pressures regularly? Now, probably don't have to do this every morning or even every week, but it is important to regularly check your tyre pressures. Certainly when you refuel the car, that would be a good occasion to check those tyre pressures, and that can flag up issues like slow punctures. And if your tyre pressures are down, you're robbing yourself of fuel economy, but you're also dramatically increasing the wear and tear on the tyres because they're going through a lot more flexing, a lot more heat is being generated due to the loss of pressure in the tyre and just the way the tyre reacts with the road and with all the vibrations on the road surface. So other checks you should be doing really is all the fluids in the engine. So the engine coolant level, the brake fluid level, and most importantly, the oil levels, and just make sure these are all at the correct levels. If you want to be particularly nerdy, you can check the specific gravity and just see if the water has started to get into the brake fluid or the antifreeze levels are out of balance with what they should be for the time of year. So if you're going into winter, you certainly want to make sure that antifreeze is effective. The last thing you want is your engine freezing up on you, because that is going to be an expensive repair. But all of these very simple checks can save you running up thousands in repair bills, and they can also prevent the inconvenience of having a breakdown at some point in the future. So another common thing that I see on the roads all the time is lane change problems. It was drummed into us when we were learning to drive: mirror, signal, maneuver. You check your mirror. So when I look in the mirror, I like to reflect. But the mirrors are not just there for checking out your appearance, correcting your makeup, or looking at the person behind you in the car. The mirrors are there to build up an important picture of the driving conditions. So you should be aware of who's behind you, who's behind them, and the relative speeds they're going at, just in case you need to take evasive action. But when you maneuver, the first thing you need to check is that the space you're moving into is clear. So using your mirrors early on will have told you what is likely to be in that blind spot. If you look over your shoulder, that can be a life-saving move. So a lot of older drivers don't seem to have this habit of just turning their heads and looking over their shoulder. But in reality, that could potentially save your life. So although mirrors are well designed nowadays, there's little convex areas that go into the blind spot. Some cars are equipped with blind spot warnings, but it would be folly to get out of the habit of checking physically over your shoulder just to check that blind spot before you start maneuvering. Now, we've done the mirrors and we've done the maneuvering, but we should really talk about signals. Turn signals, indicators are essential. Other drivers are not psychic, they're not telepathic, they don't know what you're going to do. And a little bit of early indication as to your intentions, whether you're changing lane or turning off, can make other drivers' lives a lot easier, and it can avoid them from making mistakes where they potentially plough into the back of you just because they're not aware that you're suddenly going to be changing lanes or changing positions on the road. So we've spoken about driving too close to the car in front. We also really need to talk about stopping distances. So you certainly, on those country lanes with lots of twisty roads, you want to make sure that you can stop the car in the distance you can see. That seems to make perfect sense to most drivers. But many fail to acknowledge the fact that other cars may be travelling towards you. So you really need to halve that safe stopping distance, because your stopping distance and the approaching car's stopping distance needs to be sufficient to allow you both to come to a stop before you collide into each other. So here in the UK, we have some pretty shocking roads that are completely blind, and you are pretty much down to just the width of one car. So you really do need to keep your wits about you. In some areas, it's customary just to honk your horn when you come up to these blind bends and blind corners, but you can't assume that everyone else is also going to do that. You've always got to be prepared for the other idiot on the road that's coming towards you. And I don't know what it's like in your area, please let me know, but there are lots of idiots on the roads to be careful of and to be wary of. And we need to adjust our driving style to compensate for the mistakes they make. It's all very well having a non-fault accident where the blame is entirely on another driver, but the really good driver can avoid those incidents as much as possible and just reduce the likelihood of all the inconvenience that comes from having a road traffic accident, the potential injuries that would be caused, and the financial hit that you will take invariably when you get your car repaired, sorted, replaced or written off and have had to deal with insurance companies. So another problem that I see quite a lot is people driving along in the wrong gear. They often do this for economy purposes, so they'll drop it into the highest gear they can just to maximize their fuel economy. If they need to suddenly accelerate out of trouble, they can't do that. The torque and the power is just not there at that low point in the RPM range, and that is particularly true if you're driving a turbocharged vehicle, turbocharged engine. It can also affect the handling of some cars just being in the wrong gear. Moving the gear stick into neutral is a big no-no as well, because that can have detrimental effects on the brake servo and the way the brakes actually operate. And certainly turning the engine off to save fuel is something you should really avoid doing, because that would eliminate the brake servo from working completely, and you run the risk of locking your steering column if you turn the engine off and turn the key too far. So those common habits that people are picking up to save fuel can actually prove to be quite dangerous when you're out and about on the road. So the final point, and this is quite a big point, and I do see this a lot, and it is a very serious issue on most production cars, and that's braking downhill. So if you're traveling downhill, the tendency for most drivers is just to put their foot on the brake and just cause a little bit of friction in the brake pads just to arrest the car's acceleration and maintain a steady speed. It would be far better in most situations to just drop down a gear or two and let engine braking maintain the safe speed of the car. So what's happening in the brakes as they're slowing the car up, they're getting hotter and hotter and hotter. So the pads are starting to heat up, the brake discs or the rotors themselves are starting to heat up, and the brake fluid can actually start to boil in some cases. So what will happen generally is that the brakes will fail to work. You'll experience brake fade if they get too hot. So you'll go to apply the brakes and they just won't be there for you because they've overheated. In some situations, the brakes can actually combust, catch fire, and you've got a whole host of other problems that come about from that. So don't touch the brakes on long periods of time when you're going downhill, because that really is going to build up a lot of unnecessary heat in the braking system, and it's going to have all sorts of consequences and problems for you in the long run. So obviously you do need to touch the brakes if you need to slow up, but the key giveaway here in this video, the top tip, is to avoid building too much heat up in the braking system, just to make sure that those brakes are effective when you actually need to stop. I hope these tips have been useful to you. I've actually redone this video. We had some comments comments from people on the other videos that the sound quality was rather dubious, and we've certainly moved on a lot in abilities to push out videos of a higher quality. We're still not up to studio standards, so thanks for bearing with us. I think we're always going to be a small channel, and we're doing the best we can. So please let us know what you think in the comment. Let us know what your thoughts are on this topic of safe driving, and if you've got any tips to pass on, let us know in the comments. Please boop that like button, because that really does help us to get out there, and subscribe if you haven't done so, because we'd love you to stay tuned. And thanks for watching, and I've lined this video up for you that you should find really interesting. Thanks for watching. See you in this next video.